And we are on. I don't know if you guys all heard that recording in progress, but
yeah,
I did.
okay,
Weirdly
cool.
robotic.
We are
Still
on.
not used to it.
awesome.
Right. So welcome, collective, and those that will be viewing this, I guess, in the past or in the future, sorry, to the first edition Earlywork Masterclass. Basically, the idea is that we have lots of awesome, super passionate people in the Earlywork community that we think a lot of people have spoken to us about, sort of keen to connect, and a lot of people have really awesome ideas and product and specific area expertise that are willing to share. Lessons and sort of insights into what they're doing, whether it's a startup or sort of side hustle and the like. So we're super lucky and grateful to be joined by Sam, Sam and I go a bit back, and I think Dan too. And I think Sam's got an awesome story and, something I think that the average young person is super interested in sort of the role of media in society and how, with the proliferation of social media and everyone's sort of a journalist these days on Twitter. So what does that all mean? And look forward to Sam sort of talking us through that journey. A bit more on Sam. So Sam so Sam started the Daily Aus back in 2017 and has sort of been working multiple jobs in law and in media for the last few years. And recently, I believe at the beginning of this year, made the jump into full-time startup mode, which is super exciting and a scary journey. But, as he briefly mentioned, they've been growing the team and yeah, super exciting. But Sam today is presenting on trust in the media, which is a super interesting topic for me personally. I'm sure some users out there. So may hand it over to Sam to take us through.
Thanks, guys. And congratulations to the founders of the group for establishing a super cool Slack network. And just like, I think the way that you guys are organizing yourself and communicating is amazing. One of my housemates asked me the other day, he said, he works for Accenture, and he said, I'm trying to hire some good young people for Accenture. Do you know how I should go about it? And the first thing I said was join the Slack community and write in the group. And that's exactly what he did. So that's that's kind of the model in action. So that's pretty cool. All of these conversations are always much better if you can ask some questions throughout. So please just jump in. It's way more engaging. Basically, the point that I wanted to make with trust in media is relatively brief. And that is that there is no trust in media. So the latest surveys from the University of Canberra, who do a digital news survey every year, say that approximately 2/3 of Australians under 30 have zero trust in media on a scale of 1 to 10. So, the fact that 2/3 of Australians say that they have zero trust is really concerning. And that's come from a number of different factors in media that I think is really helpful to think about when thinking about any industry. And those factors primarily for me are the proliferation of the democratization of information. There's a lot of long words there, but basically the idea that anyone's a journo, which is actually really scary because it means that you can get the news wrong a lot. And the second is the structures of the industry here is that we're a monopoly, right? Pretty much. I mean, maybe at a push you can say there's two main players, but really News Limited runs the show. So that doesn't do a lot to broaden the sense of trust in an industry, that everyone's got the best interests at heart when making their products. The number of times we've been messaged over the years by people who've said, hey, are you guys associated with News Limited? We wanted to know before we follow you. Is hundreds of times we've had that message. And that is a really interesting kind of logic to draw, going straight from I'm seeing a new media product online to it must be owned by Rupert Murdoch. And that goes to the trust issues. So we think about trust every day, and we think about ways to try and reward users for sticking with us, because we know that what we're reporting on is not pleasant a lot of the time. We try and obviously have as much good news as we can, but I mean, you know, we're about to tell the whole of Victoria that they have to stay home for another 7 days. That's not we can't ride the wave of a positive consumer interaction that a lot of other brands can. It's going to feel shit to engage with our product. So instead of trying to reward users with positive energy and that kind of stuff, we reward them with reliability and with trust, and with the sense that if they're going to give their time to the Daily Aus, it's going to be time well spent. One of the most successful ways that we've found can increase trust in media is a sense of like meta honesty. And what I mean by that is that we've gone out of our way on a number of different occasions to be ridiculously transparent with our audience. So the most recent example is we ran our first giveaway with Bed Threads, another Australian company. I didn't think it would work, but it really, really did work. And, you know, we've had, I think at the moment, it's still got a few days left to run, but we've already got 3,000 new followers from that campaign.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but I saw that. I thought it was amazing how you were so transparent about it. You literally like laid out like why we're doing this, the terms of the arrangement, and that's just such a like refreshing approach to advertisements. So I guess congrats to that, and any insight into sort of coming up with that would be super cool to hear.
Well, that was a really, really considered strategy from us, is to be as transparent as possible. I haven't read any disclaimer as transparent as what we wrote on social media. You know, we went well beyond doing hashtag ad or hashtag sponsored or anything. We said, this is why we're engaging with the company. This is how much we're getting paid for it, which was $0. This is our aim for the campaign, and this is how you can help us. We also then said, these are the reasons why we think this is a person to partner with. And, you know, we've been approached by many, many big brands because we have a good social media following of young people. And we've said no to pretty much all of them, except now Bed Threads and hopefully a few others that align with everything from how much they pay their workers to whether they are carbon neutral to the way that they go about their marketing themselves. And that's because we were worried about a wave of negative feedback that comes from it. So we wanted to preempt all of those answers in the caption. And what we've seen is, you know, we've got 17,000 people who've entered, which is about 1 in 6 of our followers. We've got, 3,000 new followers to the page, which if you're going off $1 per follower acquisition cost for social media, which is kind of the rule of thumb, then, you know, that's a big cost that we've just skipped. But more importantly, we have shown yet again that this is the way we want to go about commercialization and growth, and hopefully you can still read our news without feeling like it's sponsored content. Because what we don't want is for us to report on climate change, a story about carbon emissions on cars, and people to think, oh, is that sponsored by a car company? That as soon as we do that, it's kind of game over. So I think we executed that really well. One of the other things that we've done that has shown that meta transparency is when we make mistakes. The standard apology from a news company is, the Sydney Morning Herald regrets any misunderstanding caused by the article. The Sydney Morning Herald acknowledges no legal liability in publishing the claims, nor does it understand the effects on this, and then they apologize for any harm felt. We have made kind of 2 or 3 big mistakes in our reporting, which happens in breaking news and happens in news. And we've come back and said, we totally stuffed this up. Here's a rewritten version of how it should have been. We've left the old version up so you can understand where we went wrong. And we find the engagement on those posts to be incredible as well. And if you look at the comments on those posts, the comments are all, wow, this is so refreshing. Wow, this does a lot for trust. Wow, this is incredible. Like, it's all positive. And I think people ignore the fact that we've actually made a mistake. And it's just a different way. Sorry, I think there's a street cleaner. This often happens during a podcast, so then we have to just take a half an hour pause. I think there's a real learning there for media. It's like that transparency. Like if you go and look at other youth media brands, one that rhymes with schmedestrian and one that rhymes with monkey, they will write an article about why this new Bose speaker is a must-have for any share house. And unfortunately, what they won't say is that they've been paid $5,000 to write an article by Bose and to integrate that content. So native content and integrated content is like gold at the moment to advertisers, because everyone's got ad blockers on their browsers. Everyone's got ad skippers on their YouTube. Like the ways that brands can cut through is becoming more limited. We've seen a little bit more regulation for that trust, that sense of trust. Like the Ad Council of Australia is now cracking down on Instagram influencers, and they actually fined one. Her name is Anna Heinrich, and they fined her like $25,000, I think, for not saying that a dress she was wearing in a photo, and when she was saying how good the dress was a paid native piece of content. And so I guess the easiest way to go about it is to continue on that kind of meta honesty parade, and show that young people will actually trust the news again if the news shows them the respect and trust back. I've actually spoken to a lot of other industries though about this, and other startups. And I thought it would be relevant for you guys to think about how that relates to your particular kind of professional ecosystems. Another example of a startup that that we actually work with quite a bit, they're our accountants, is an accounting firm called Luna. And Luna's in Melbourne, and they have the same, they realize there's huge trust issues with accountants, and everyone goes, oh, the bloody accountants, and they're stealing my money and it's not worth it, and oh my God. So they've come out like, and every single document they write is written in plain English, and they've got that self-awareness in their messaging and their brand messaging of like, I think they even say on their website, we know you're not going to trust any accountants, so we've gone over and above to make sure that you trust us. It's such an effective strategy for young people, and I think there's a lot to learn. So that was kind of like my main point about trust, is these two elements of owning up to your mistakes and being totally honest. But I'd love to hear some reflections from you guys as to whether you actually trust the media, and if not, why not? And we can kind of chat through some of these issues of trust.
Super, super cool. I think, I suppose, yeah, like one thought that's kind of just popping in my mind now, just thinking about, I suppose, like comparative trust in media. I think a big thing is like I'm trying to understand, like, okay, who is the writer? What is their background? Like what makes them kind of a credible source? And so I suppose kind of like, if you look at like, I look at like my own news consumption, and oftentimes there'll be stuff, like New York Times, which, like generally is kind of, not super biased, but, then again, people still say it has some slant. I think what I often look for is, I suppose, like, references to, you look at, I suppose professors, medical professionals, depending upon obviously the content matter. But yeah, I suppose I'd be interested to kind of understand, like, obviously as like a young news startup, how do you ensure that you build that same degree of kind of credibility in kind of the writing team, and ensuring that you're pulling a writing team from, I suppose, kind of diverse minds, diverse sources?
So the first way that we ensure that we have credibility is that we're never wrong. And I know that I said we apologized a few times for things we were wrong with, and they were actually more about the evolving nature of the story itself. So it was, a domestic violence incident that ended in the death of the person and the cause of death, and we kind of gave the wrong lead on what the cause of death was, but we were taking the police's aim. So to return to kind of the professor and all that kind of point, is that we're not wrong on facts. So, if you could read the last 900 articles we've written, that everything's right. And I think that's the best way to show that we know what we're doing. And that's why we did the Daily Aus for 3 years with an audience of under 1,000, and built that library of content that wasn't wrong. In terms of the editorial process, nothing goes up without Zara or I interrogating the shit out of it. And because we have a lot of young writers on our staff that are really, really great, but journalists have a reputation in the media, of course, like as what we've been talking about, to, you know, hyper speculate or to go too early or to take liberties. You know, the amount of times I read something like hundreds of people have died in a landslide in Ghana. And I look up the death toll and it was 115. Now, I think writing hundreds is irresponsible journalism there. And that's not actually aiming for the highest shelf of trust and respectability. So we always try and catch those errors. And then in terms of reaching out to experts and that kind of thing, I think we're a little bit hamstrung by resources, and we can't spend a heap of time tracking down the story. But we use a lot of secondary research. So we'll like often look at peer-reviewed journals and find something that helps us. We talk a lot about confirmation bias. So if you're looking for something that says that climate change is getting worse, you're going to find it. And if you're looking for something that says, actually, there's nothing to worry about, you're going to find it. So we need to kind of really expand our scope and entertain the other side. And we are, the first thing we've been focusing on with recruitment is geographically diverse. And we made a very strategic decision to make sure that that was a priority before thinking through backgrounds and that kind of thing, because we needed to establish ourselves. Otherwise, we were just going to write for Sydney. And that kind of limits you straight away if you're trying to be a national publication. So we've got someone in Canberra, Melbourne, and Adelaide. And yesterday, for example, there was a really cool story in Adelaide of a high school where the students staged a walkout because the school has failed to implement sexual consent education. That story did not hit the main publications in mainstream media. And I'd say because it's in Adelaide. If that had happened in Melbourne or Sydney, it probably would have come. I mean, there was a bit of news yesterday around COVID, so it was a busy news cycle, but that's a really important story, especially for our audience. So the fact that we had a reporter in Adelaide who could go to the school and talk to the people was like the beginnings of our journey towards being a proper news company. We do need to hire more diverse, though. We're a very lean team at the moment, so the sample size is quite small, but Zara and I both have the same background in terms of we're both from the eastern suburbs of Sydney, and we both kind of had similar education and that kind of thing. So we're acutely aware of that. And that's going to be part of the fun of building a media company, is like making hires that is ethnically diverse. And, I'd love to make sure that if somebody is writing about, women's issues, that they're not a man. That would be a great start. So it's part of our growth. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, just reflecting back on the original question, Sam, on trust in the media. So I'm quite an avid Twitter user, and I find myself actually trusting the individual over the brand. So a lot of the people that I follow and rely on for news, I'd say I don't even know which company they work for, which is quite interesting. I don't know whether that was a conscious decision or not, but how do you think about sort of journalism in its, obviously the Daily Aus is a very strong brand, but sort of what's the balance in terms of focusing on individual reporters and letting them have their own profile versus sort of a brand-led media approach?
So this is one of the controversial questions in journalism at the moment is, should a reporter from the ABC be allowed to say whatever they want on their personal Twitter accounts? That's like a really big issue, and companies are coming out with their own internal guidelines about that. And there's issues around freedom of speech and thought and all that kind of stuff. For us, we have a very unique model in that we don't even have bylines in our stories. So it's just from a voice of the Daily Aus. And that's to create a sense of unity and to go back to our original mission of being the friend in your pocket that's helping you understand the news. Our opinions are not important. It's not actually important who we are. What's important is that we tell you what you need to know to have an informed conversation and to go and do your own research on a topic. In saying all of that, we've been meeting with, everyone from investors to PR and growth specialists to marketers, whatever, and they all say the same thing in terms of accelerating our growth. And it's been quite funny to hear them all say the same tip, and that is to build the profiles of Sam and Zara. So even when we got signed with our podcast, we got signed to Acast, which is the biggest podcast network in the world. We sat with them and we pitched them the thing, and they said yes, and they signed us onto the deal and everything. And then they kind of said, well, we'll sign you on the condition that your faces are on the front of the album artwork cover, because we have seen success in news podcasts that have trust in a person, and it goes straight back to trust. It goes, the fact that people know who we are is becoming really important. We've had a lot of pushback from people who say, I really like you guys, but as you just said, like, I don't know your personal points of view. And we're going to try and stay firm on telling people what our personal points of view are. So neither of us are big Twitter users for that reason, in terms of curators ourselves, but we need to let people in onto who we are. So not necessarily what we think, but the fact that we're young, and the fact that we, approach things in a certain way, and the fact that we're trying to grow a business, and all of those kind of story ideas around it is really important to building trust as well. I just think that there's too many opinions out there. And also, to be perfectly honest with you, who gives a shit what I think? Like, I'm 26 and I read the same stuff as everybody else. I just read more of it. I'm not an expert in anything. So if you asked me, well, you're a journalist, so what do you think about Israel and Palestine? I'd say, well, it doesn't matter. I think whatever the experts think in both ways, and, do your own deep dive. So opinion is very crowded, and objective facts is not very crowded. So we'll stick to our lane. Any other questions around disruption, capital raises, investments, trust, growing a business, social media?
Yeah. So as someone who,
Microphone man.
yeah, microphone man. As someone who is constantly combating friends and friends of friends who do spread misinformation.
Yeah.
I've got everything. I don't know why I'm associated, but I've just been having touch points with like anti-vaxxers, freedom rally people, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What has been? Do you have any advice for people who want to dissect or combat misinformation? And since you've been focusing a lot on the facts, perhaps we can start with like best ways you found to verify the truth of things, especially like when the media, the normal media talks about it. Yeah.
So I think on a very human level, I find the best thing to say to people who are saying something that I don't think is right, there's two leading questions I like to ask. One is, what did you mean by that? And that can often lead people to explaining their point of view a little bit more, and you can then identify where they've gotten the information from. And the other question that I like to ask is, where do you get your news from on this particular issue? Because what I'll find is that if you're getting your news on the economy, you might be a traditional news reader, but if you're getting your news on the COVID vaccine, you might be getting that from social media. So I think labeling somebody as only a traditional news reader or only a social media news reader is quite simplistic. People look to different platforms for different issues. So I think you can open up the discussion then of where do you go to find out the latest vaccine data about blood clots? And then they'll probably say Facebook or Instagram. And then that can open up the discussion. In terms of combating misinformation on a wider scale from a media perspective and from a journalism perspective, The best thing that we can do is fact check the other side in a respectful way. So if there's an issue like, I think the blood clotting one is the one that's sticking out to me. There was a lot of noise and a lot of DMs we were getting around the contraceptive pill and how that was being injected into the argument around blood clotting and AstraZeneca and everything, and everyone was going to die and it was all going to be a disaster. So we did a post directly addressing those facts and made sure that everything was referenced. So I think that the media needs to be aware of what big misinformation lines of inquiry are out there and tackle them head on. So I think saying why AstraZeneca is not dangerous is different to saying why AstraZeneca is good. It's not our job to prove why something, to endorse something, it's to clarify whether it has negative impacts. And it's that nuance, which is hard to nail, but it's really important. So we're never going to encourage people to get vaccinated. That's not our job. That's not objective. The government should be doing that. They're not, but that's a conversation for a separate day. But it is our job to show the research and to show and to help you understand the statistics. So when you hear that there's been 6 blood clots in Sweden from AstraZeneca, then we can say, okay, well, how many people got it? And that kind of stuff, that helps us put everything in the right context.
Cool, thanks a lot.
I'm sorry that you have to battle through misinformation. I was walking through the city on Saturday morning, had a lovely staycation in a hotel in the city and woke up to shouting and looked out of the hotel window and it was a huge anti-vaxxer rally. Like, 2,500 people, kids, everything. And it was quite confronting for me because I like science.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. But yeah, good question.
I got a question.
Yeah.
So I like to think about, sort of the future with all these things. And I think, I have a very clear idea in what the future is going to look like, in various sort of technology verticals. But with news and news consumption, I really would love to get your take on, 10, 15, 20 years from now, how do people consume news? What does news look like? I guess it's the $1 million question, but any insights, Sam, would be super interesting to get your perspective.
So I think that the era of paying for news is over. And I think that unless you're a niche publication that has a niche interest with an audience that is really passionate, so like a really good cryptocurrency publication that people absolutely love and rely on, then it's not over. But for general news consumption, I really do believe that subscriptions are over. The only caveat to that is perhaps like what The Guardian are doing and looking at donation models and sponsorships and that kind of stuff. But look, I think I just don't think that there's much hope to be put on that. And I also think the trust issues relating to media mean that advertising is increasingly hard to pull off. So that doesn't leave very bright outlook for the future of media in terms of a monetization strategy. The way that I see media making money in the future and sustainably existing is through product. And what I mean by that is a media company targeting a particular audience and then creating products for that audience. So if you're Batuta Advocate, they're essentially a media company, right? They write articles and it's just the fact that they're all funny is different, but they know that their audience is 35 to 44-year-old males. They foster a sense of community in their content. And what do? They make their own beer. And they brought in, $50 million in revenue last year from alcohol. Now, they're a media company that is diversifying into product. You've got somebody like JS Health, who is a dietitian and a nutritionist and has 500,000 followers and kind of guides people on advice. Now, she had two choices. She could either take a sponsorship deal to do an ad for Swiss men's Ultivites and whatever, or she can make her own men's multivitamin and say, if you trust me, then this is what I've made and you should go buy it. And she's built a huge media company off the back of her products. So for us, we're looking at where do young people spend money and where can they spend money with us to also support media habits. So one idea that we were thinking about yesterday, and it's just like so big that I can't even consider how it would work, but wouldn't it be cool if we made our own phone network? So like we all pay Vodafone and Optus and Telstra all of these money per month. And I think if we said to our audience of now 115,000, hey, come over to our network, it's the same price and you'll be helping sustain a newsroom, then I think we'll get some good traction there. Now, I looked on Wikipedia on how to build a phone network and I couldn't find anything. But it's that type of thinking that I'm really enjoying, is like, first step is to build the audience. Second step is to work out how they'll consume a product and offer them that product. Very different way of thinking about it. And if we circle back in a year, I might be asking all of you guys for a job and we'll prove that it didn't work. But that's part of the fun.
That's super interesting. I had no idea about the Batuta Advocate, like alcohol sales, like the degree to which that was a part of their business. It's super crazy.
Yeah.
How do you kind of weigh up that, like, I suppose, like product oriented news organization versus kind of, you know, models like Patreon or Substack where you have people kind of, I suppose, like paying for news?
I think it's again, it goes back to who the audience is. So the Substack and Patreon audiences are these niche fanatics about a particular thing who will often have a really strong sense of belonging to a community that is led by the author or that is moderated by the author. Our audience at the Daily Aus is people who primarily don't read any other news source. So it's going to be a really hard sell to get them to pay for something that they already don't think is particularly important. It's going to be much easier for The Guardian, who foster this sense of like intellectual curiosity and the pursuit of truth and social justice and all of their angles. It'll be much easier for them to say, in order to keep doing this really important work, we need your support. So the Patreon and Substack models are like single-handedly sustaining 85% of the journalism ecosystem in the world. Like they're just amazing. And there's people who have made whole careers. There's an interesting idea that a lot of people talk about in media with the future business models. That is that you need 1,000 fans who will pay $100 a year and you've got a sustainable product. One of the big media theorists in America has come out this year. That model's been around for a while. One of the big critics have come out this year and said, actually, you need 1,000 super fans paying $100 a year was the old model. Now they think you need 100 super fans paying $1,000 a year. And that's the Substack and Patreon model of really, really finding, 100 people, which is not a lot, who are totally dedicated to exploring this niche. And that's a way to sustain a media business. I actually prefer the 1,000 people for $100. I think that's like an easier sell and it allows for a slightly bigger audience and that kind of thing. But yeah, that's the Patreon and Substack game.
Super cool. Appreciate the insights.
Yeah.
Any other questions on the call? Trust, startups, business ethics.
Work-life balance. Don't get one of these.
Don't get an Apple Watch?
Why not?
I just read the news all day.
Yeah.
I'm sitting across from my girlfriend at dinner being like, yeah, cool. Sweet.
My problem is I'm obsessed with closing the rings.
Yeah.
That's equally bad.
That's good though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I turned off like all my notifications on my watch as well. Like I don't want the watch to control me.
Yeah.
Like yeah, I want to be in control. So I only look at it when I want to.
I remember when I had control.
Oh man.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, if no more questions, I think we'll sort of wrap it up here. We've got a nice little recording bank that should be good to share with the rest of the community. But on behalf of the Earlywork community, which is inclusive of everyone on this call, we'd like to say thank you, Sam, for giving your time. And yeah, I've always been a big Daily Aus fan and look to continue supporting it in the future and sort of being an advocate of it to all of my young peers. So yeah, look forward to sort of tracking the journey and hearing about future milestones because it's a super exciting one.
Thanks, guys. And yeah, all can reach out anytime for a chat. I love these kind of things.
All right, awesome. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everyone, and happy hump day.
Happy hunting. See you.
Happy hump day.
Yeah.